The waiter set down an $80 seafood platter complete with sparkler candles in front of my 6-year-old nieces, while my 8-year-old son, Tommy, stared at the kids' menu he wasn't allowed to touch. "Order something cheap for your kids, Brian. We're not covering them," Dad announced loud enough for half of Romano's Steakhouse to hear. My stepmother Patricia smiled sweetly as she adjusted the linen napkin in her lap, while my sister Amanda suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. Tommy's shoulders slumped as he watched his cousins Sophie and Grace giggle at their elaborate presentation. I felt every eye in that upscale dining room turn toward our table, witnessing my son's humiliation in real time. I never thought I'd be the family disappointment, but here I was, at 32, sitting across from my father, Harold, and stepmother Patricia, feeling like a teenager who'd been caught breaking curfew. My divorce from Jenny had been finalized 8 months ago, and the custody arrangement brought Tommy and me back to Cedar Falls, Minnesota, where family dynamics I'd escaped years earlier suddenly mattered again. Dad had remarried Patricia 3 years after Mom died from breast cancer. The transition hadn't been smooth for anyone, but Amanda seemed to navigate it better than I did. Maybe that's because she'd struggled financially as a single mother until she married Marcus, a successful dentist, 2 years ago. Suddenly, she went from clipping coupons to driving a BMW, and Dad's attitude toward her shifted completely. Where he once worried about her poor choices, he now bragged about her good fortune to anyone who'd listen. I worked as a regional manager for Midwest Construction Supply, pulling in a decent $75,000 a year. Not wealthy by any stretch, but enough to provide for Tommy and maintain some dignity. At least I thought it was enough, until this dinner made me question everything I believed about my place in the family hierarchy. The invitation had come from Dad himself 2 weeks earlier. "Tommy hit his first home run in Little League," I'd told him proudly over the phone. "Maybe we could celebrate with a family dinner?" Dad suggested Romano's the kind of place where appetizers cost more than most people spend on lunch. I should have known something was off when he chose somewhere so expensive, but I figured it meant he wanted to make Tommy feel special. The first warning sign came that afternoon, when Dad called. "Just so you know, son Patricia and I will handle our own bill tonight. You'll be responsible for yourself and Tommy." His tone was casual, like he was mentioning the weather. "We don't want any confusion when the check comes." I'd been taken aback, but tried to stay diplomatic. "Sure, Dad, I can cover us. But maybe we could split things more evenly. It's supposed to be a celebration for Tommy." "You make your own money now, Brian. Time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet instead of expecting handouts." The conversation left me unsettled, but I told myself he was trying to teach me independence. Looking back, I realized that phone call was just the setup for tonight's main event. When we arrived at Romano's, Amanda's family was already seated. The girls wore matching pink dresses that probably cost more than Tommy's entire wardrobe, while Amanda sported jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. Marcus had stayed home with a dental emergency, leaving Amanda to handle both daughters alone. "Uncle Brian." Sophie and Grace chorused as we approached. They genuinely loved Tommy, which made everything that followed even more painful to watch. "Hey. Hey there, troublemakers," I said, ruffling their hair. Tommy hung back shyly, still getting used to being around his cousins after months of living hours away. Patricia stood to give me a brief hug that felt more like a political handshake. "Brian, you look well, and Tommy's gotten so tall." Her voice carried that particular tone some people use with children and service workers, pleasant on the surface, but somehow condescending. Dad clapped me on the shoulder with more force than necessary. "There's my boy ready to celebrate Tommy's big achievement." I wanted to believe his enthusiasm was genuine, but something in his eyes reminded me of the look he used to get before delivering bad news. Still, this was about Tommy, not about whatever family politics were brewing beneath the surface. The restaurant hummed with Saturday evening energy. Families filled most tables celebrating anniversaries, birthdays, and weekend gatherings. The lighting was warm, the service attentive, and under different circumstances, it would have been the perfect place to make Tommy feel like the champion he was. But as we settled into our seats, I noticed Patricia whisper something to Amanda that made my sister glance nervously in my direction. Dad studied his menu with unusual intensity, while Tommy swung his legs and looked around with the wide-eyed wonder of a kid who rarely got taken to fancy restaurants. "Can I have the steak like Grandpa?" Tommy asked innocently, pointing at the ribeye section. Before I could respond, Dad's voice cut across the table with military precision. "You'll find plenty of good options in the children's section, sport. No need to get fancy." Tommy's face fell slightly, but he nodded and picked up the kids' menu. I felt the first spark of anger ignite in my chest, but I pushed it down. This was supposed to be his night. That's when the waiter appeared with the seafood towers, complete with those ridiculous sparkler candles that made Sophie and Grace squeal with delight. The presentation was elaborate enough to stop conversations at nearby tables, and I watched Tommy's expression change from curiosity to confusion to something that looked dangerously close to shame. "Order something cheap for your kids, Brian." Dad announced, his voice carrying further than necessary. "We're not covering them." The words hit the table like a slap. Patricia's smile never wavered, but I caught the satisfied glint in her eyes. Amanda became very interested in adjusting her napkin. And Tommy, my 8-year-old son, who'd been on top of the world just hours earlier, slowly put down the adult menu he'd been pretending to read and stared at his hands. That's when I knew this wasn't about money independence or teaching lessons. This was about something else entirely, and my son was caught in the crossfire. The sparkler candles on the girls' seafood towers finished burning out, leaving tiny wisps of smoke that seemed to hang in the air like question marks. Our waiter, a young man whose name tag read Jake, approached with practiced professionalism, though I caught him glancing uncertainly between the two halves of our table. "Good evening, folks. Can I start anyone off with drinks tonight?" Jake's voice carried the cheerful efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate complicated family dynamics during his restaurant shifts. Patricia leaned forward with theatrical enthusiasm. "Oh, we're celebrating tonight. Could we see your wine list, something special for the occasion?" She gestured toward the twins, who were still giggling over their elaborate presentation. "Absolutely. And for the young champions here." Jake smiled at all 3 children, treating them equally, despite the obvious disparity in their meal situations. "The girls would love some of that sparkling cider you have," Amanda said. "The fancy kind with the real cork." Tommy looked at me hopefully. "Dad, can I have the sparkling cider too?" Before I could answer, Patricia's voice cut through the moment. "Oh, honey, I'm sure your daddy wants to keep things simple tonight. Maybe just a regular soda." The condescension in her tone made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Tommy can have whatever he wants to drink," I said firmly. "Sparkling cider sounds perfect." Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. How thoughtful." Jake took our drink orders and promised to return with the wine list. As soon as he left, Patricia launched into what I can only describe as a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. "Amanda, darling, you simply must try the lobster tail here. It's flown in fresh from Maine every day." She turned to Dad with wide eyes. "Harold, remember when we had that wonderful seafood dinner in Bar Harbor last summer? This place reminds me so much of that little restaurant overlooking the harbor." Dad nodded along, either oblivious to her game or choosing to ignore it. "Patricia knows her restaurants, never steered us wrong yet. And the wine selection here is supposed to be exceptional." Patricia continued studying the list Jake had left behind. "I was reading about their sommelier in the local magazine. Apparently he trained in Napa Valley." Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd always been sensitive to other people's feelings, even as kids, and I could tell Patricia's performance was making her squirm. "Maybe we should just get something reasonable," Amanda suggested quietly. "It's really about celebrating Tommy's home run, right?" "Nonsense." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Special occasions call for special treatment. You deserve the finer things, sweetheart. After everything you've been through, you've earned a little luxury. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Everything you've been through as opposed to your brother who apparently hadn't suffered enough to deserve decent treatment. When Jake returned with our drinks, Patricia ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. She made sure to ask detailed questions about the vintage, the region, and the recommended food pairings, performing sophistication for an audience that included my 8-year-old son. Now let's see about dinner, Patricia said, opening her menu with flourish. Amanda, the filet mignon here is supposed to be incredible. And Harold, didn't you mention wanting to try their aged ribeye? Dad grunted his agreement, already committed to whatever script Patricia was following. The 16-ounce cut sounds about right. Tommy had been quietly studying his kids' menu, occasionally glancing at the adult options with longing. The children's section offered the usual suspects: chicken tenders, grilled cheese, mini burgers, and mac and cheese. Nothing wrong with any of it, but a far cry from the elaborate meals being planned around him. Uncle Brian, what are you going to get? Sophie asked innocently. I'm still deciding, sweetheart. I smiled at her, grateful for her genuine interest. What about you girls? Mommy said we can have the special kids' dinner with the dessert and everything. Grace bounced in her seat with excitement. Amanda looked embarrassed. They don't get treats like this very often. Marcus thought it would be nice to let them splurge a little. I watched as Jake approached with his order pad, and Patricia immediately commanded his attention. We'll start with the crab cakes appetizer for the table, she announced. And could you tell us about the preparation on the duck confit? Jake launched into a detailed description of the cooking process, while Patricia nodded along like she was conducting a wine tasting. Meanwhile, Tommy traced patterns on his kids' menu, with his finger occasionally stealing glances at the main menu sitting just out of his reach. For the young ladies, Patricia continued. They'll have your premium children's meals with all the upgrades. Extra sides, the chocolate dessert tower, and those fun sparkler candles again if possible. Absolutely, Jake said, scribbling notes. Those meals come with their choice of appetizer too. Would they like the fruit platter or the cheese sticks? Oh, the fruit platter sounds lovely, Patricia gushed. So healthy and colorful. I felt Tommy's eyes on me, waiting to see what options he'd have. The premium kids' meals cost $30 each, while the basic versions ran about $12. The difference wasn't just money. It was a statement about which children mattered. Tommy, what sounds good to you, buddy? I asked, determined to let him choose. He studied his menu carefully, the way kids do when they sense the weight of a decision. Could I maybe have the chicken tenders, but the regular ones, not the fancy kind? My heart broke a little at his careful qualification. 8 years old, and he was already learning to minimize his needs to avoid disappointing the adults around him. You can have whatever looks good, I told him gently. This is your celebration dinner. Before Tommy could respond, Patricia's voice cut across our conversation. Jake, for this little man here, just the basic grilled cheese would be perfect. Kids don't really appreciate complex flavors anyway. Keep it simple. The presumption in her tone made my blood pressure spike. She'd just ordered for my son without consulting me, diminishing his choices, while simultaneously lecturing about children's supposedly limited palates. Jake looked between Patricia and me, clearly unsure who was actually making the decision. Sir, what would you prefer for your son? Tommy's old enough to order for himself, I said evenly, making eye contact with Patricia. Go ahead, Tommy. Whatever you want. Tommy looked around the table nervously, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. The chicken tenders sound really good, Dad. With fries or vegetables? Jake asked kindly. Fries, please. Great choice. And would you like the regular portion or the bigger hungry kid size? Tommy started to answer, but Patricia interrupted again. Regular is plenty. Children shouldn't overeat, especially this late in the evening. I'd reached my limit. Actually, Tommy's been playing baseball all season. Growing boys need their nutrition. Make it the bigger size, please." Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine annoyance before she recovered her sweet smile. "Of course. You know your son's appetite best." The passive-aggressive battle continued through the rest of the ordering process. Patricia made sure to emphasize every expensive choice she was making for Dad Amanda and the twins, while finding subtle ways to comment on the simplicity of Tommy's meal. When Jake finally left with our order, the table fell into an uncomfortable silence. Tommy sipped his sparkling cider and tried to engage his cousins in conversation, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, but couldn't articulate what. "Tommy." Dad finally spoke, his voice gentler than it had been all evening. "Tell me about that home run. Your old grandpa wants to hear every detail." Tommy's face lit up, and he launched into an animated description of the game. For a few minutes, the tension eased as my son recounted his moment of glory. He described the pitch, the crack of the bat, the way the ball sailed over the left fielder's head. His excitement was infectious, and even Patricia seemed genuinely engaged. But the moment of peace shattered when our appetizers arrived. Jake placed the expensive crab cakes in the center of the table, along with individual fruit platters for Sophie and Grace. Tommy watched as his cousins received their colorful arrangements of fresh berries, melon, and grapes cut into decorative shapes. "Where's Tommy's appetizer?" Grace asked innocently. Patricia answered before I could. "Uncle Brian ordered differently for Tommy. Not everyone needs the same things, sweetheart." The explanation was technically true, but emotionally devastating. Tommy looked down at his empty placemat while his cousins enjoyed their special treatment. I could see him withdrawing the joy from his baseball story, fading into embarrassment. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "I think Tommy and I need to use the restroom before dinner comes. Excuse us." I guided Tommy away from the table, needing a moment to collect myself before I said something I'd regret. But as we walked toward the back of the restaurant, I heard Patricia's voice carrying clearly to nearby tables. "Some people just have different priorities when it comes to spending money on children." The men's restroom at Romano's was mercifully empty, giving Tommy and me a private space to regroup. He stood at the sink, pretending to wash his hands while avoiding eye contact in the mirror. "Dad, did I do something wrong?" His voice was small, uncertain, in a way that made my chest tighten. "No, buddy. You didn't do anything wrong at all." I knelt down to his level, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings that don't have anything to do with kids. Tommy dried his hands with more attention than necessary. "Are we poor?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "No, Tommy. We're doing just fine. Some people just have more money than others, and that's okay." "Then why can't I have the same dinner as Sophie and Grace?" I struggled for an answer that would protect his feelings while being honest. "Because Grandpa has some rules about paying for dinner that don't make complete sense to me either." Tommy nodded solemnly, accepting my explanation with the resilience kids develop when their world doesn't quite make sense. "Okay, Dad. The chicken tenders will be good." As we walked back to the table, I found myself remembering other moments when Amanda had received preferential treatment. Birthday parties where her gifts were more expensive, school events where Dad showed up for her concerts but missed my baseball games, Christmas mornings when the pile of presents under the tree was noticeably uneven. Mom had always been the equalizer. She made sure we both felt loved and valued, quietly correcting Dad's unconscious favoritism with extra attention, special outings, and fierce advocacy when needed. Before she died, I thought I'd imagined the disparity. Now I wondered if she'd been working overtime to compensate for something I was only beginning to understand. When we returned to the table, Patricia was showing Amanda something on her phone, while Dad stared out the window with the distant expression he wore when avoiding uncomfortable conversations. The twins had finished their fruit and were carefully arranging the leftover grapes into patterns on their plates. "Everything okay?" Amanda asked as we sat down. "Just fine," I replied, making sure Tommy was settled before taking my own seat. Jake appeared with our entrees, and the production began again. Patricia's duck confit came with an elaborate presentation involving sauce drizzled in decorative patterns around the plate. Dad's ribeye was a massive piece of meat that probably cost more than my electric bill. Amanda's filet mignon arrived under a silver dome that the server lifted with theatrical flair. The twins received their upgraded kids' meals in colorful bowls shaped like animals, complete with garnishes that turned their food into art projects. Tommy's chicken tenders arrived on a plain white plate with a side of fries and a small cup of ketchup. "Doesn't that look delicious, Tommy?" Patricia said with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Perfect size for a growing boy." I watched my son survey the table, taking in the stark contrast between his simple meal and everyone else's elaborate presentations. He picked up a chicken tender and took a small bite, chewing thoughtfully. "It's really good, Dad," he said, making an effort to sound enthusiastic. Amanda caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," when she thought no one else was looking. At least someone at this table still had a conscience. The conversation during dinner focused mainly on Amanda's life, Marcus's dental practice, the twins' activities, their recent vacation to Disney World. Patricia asked detailed questions about private schools and summer camps, painting a picture of a family ascending to social heights Dad clearly wanted to be associated with. "Marcus thinks the girls should start violin lessons," Amanda mentioned. "There's supposed to be an excellent instructor in the arts district." "Wonderful." Patricia clapped her hands together. "Music education is so important for proper development. Harold, didn't your mother play piano?" Dad nodded, launching into a story about his mother's musical talents that I'd heard dozens of times. But as he talked, I noticed him stealing glances at Tommy, who was quietly eating his chicken tenders and listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention of a child trying to understand his place in the world. During a lull in the conversation, Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face lit up with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. "Oh, Amanda, I have the most wonderful idea." Patricia practically bounced in her seat. "You know that lake house rental we've been looking at? The one with the private dock and the kayaks?" "The one in Brainerd Autos?" Amanda asked. "Exactly. Well, the owners just had a cancellation for next weekend. It's available Friday through Sunday and the price is perfect. I was thinking we could have a little family getaway. You could bring the girls, they'd love the water activities." Amanda's face brightened. "That sounds amazing. The girls would go crazy for kayaking." "My thoughts exactly." Patricia turned to Dad. "Harold, you've been working so hard lately. A weekend at the lake would be perfect for you." Dad nodded his agreement already, mentally planning fishing trips and afternoon naps on the deck. "Sounds like just what the doctor ordered." Tommy had stopped eating and was listening intently to the vacation planning. I could see the wheels turning in his 8-year-old mind, wondering if this family adventure would include him. "When would we need to let them know?" Amanda asked. "Tonight, ideally. These lake rentals go fast during summer season." Patricia was already pulling up contact information on her phone. "I'll call them right after dinner." Tommy looked at me hopefully. "Dad, can we go to the lake house too?" The question created a moment of absolute silence at the table. Patricia's thumb hovered over her phone screen. Amanda suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Dad took a long sip of wine before responding. "Well, sport, this is more of a..." Dad struggled for words. Patricia jumped in to rescue him. "It's really more of a cousin bonding experience, sweetie. Sophie and Grace need some special time together, and there's limited space at the house." "But Tommy loves swimming," I said carefully. "And he's great with his cousins." "Of course he is." Patricia's voice dripped with fake sweetness. "But this particular weekend is about giving the girls some focused attention. You understand." I understood perfectly. This was another deliberate exclusion dressed up as consideration for the twins' needs. Tommy's face fell, but he nodded politely and returned to his chicken tenders. Amanda looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Maybe we could look for a bigger place that would fit everyone." "Oh, but this one is perfect for our needs," Patricia said firmly. Sometimes smaller groups work better for these intimate family experiences. The phrase, our needs, wasn't lost on me. Tommy and I weren't part of our anything, apparently. Dad cleared his throat. Brian, you understand? Patricia's put a lot of thought into this. I'm sure she has, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. Tommy had gone quiet again, processing another exclusion, with the patience of a child who was learning not to expect equal treatment. I watched him push his fries around his plate, no longer interested in eating. The rest of dinner passed in forced conversation about lake activities, rental house amenities, and weekend weather forecasts. Tommy participated when directly addressed, but had clearly retreated into himself. By the time Jake brought the dessert menus, I was ready to end this evening, before it inflicted any more damage on my son's self-esteem. Actually, I think we'll pass on dessert, I said when Jake offered the menu. Tommy has early baseball practice tomorrow. Patricia looked disappointed. Oh, but they have the most incredible chocolate souffle here, and the girls were so looking forward to sharing dessert with their cousin. Maybe next time, I said firmly. As Jake began clearing our table, Dad reached for his wallet. Let me get this taken care of. I pulled out my own wallet. I'll handle Tommy's and mine. Nonsense, Patricia said. We're all family here. But Dad was already calculating amounts on his phone. Brian's meal, and the boys come to about $45 with drinks. Patricia and I had 93, and Amanda's family was 162 with the wine. The itemized breakdown felt like a final insult, reducing our family dinner to a business transaction where relationships were measured in dollars and cents. I placed $50 on the table without comment. Keep the change for Jake, I said. He's been excellent tonight. As we gathered our things to leave, Tommy thanked everyone politely, the way I'd taught him. He hugged his cousins and told them to have fun at the lake house, displaying more grace than any of the adults at this table had managed all evening. Walking to our cars, I heard Patricia's voice behind us. Harold, I think we should call about that lake house as soon as we get home. These opportunities don't come along often. Tommy climbed into my truck and buckled his seatbelt without being asked. As I started the engine, he looked back at the restaurant where his family was still saying their goodbyes. Dad. Yeah, buddy. Next time can we just go to Chuck E. Cheese instead? Despite everything, I found myself smiling. That sounds like a perfect plan. Sunday morning came with the kind of crisp Minnesota air that usually made me grateful to be home. Tommy and I had our traditional pancake breakfast on the back deck of our small rental house, watching squirrels raid the bird feeder while we planned our day. Little League practice wasn't until afternoon, giving us time to decompress from the previous evening's disaster. Dad, can I ask you something? Tommy said between bites of blueberry pancakes. Always, buddy. Do you think Grandpa loves Sophie and Grace more than me? I set down my coffee mug, choosing my words carefully. Grandpa loves you very much, Tommy. Sometimes adults get confused about how to show love fairly. But he pays for their fancy dinners and trips. Money isn't the same thing as love, I said, though I was struggling to believe my own words. Sometimes people show love in different ways. Tommy nodded thoughtfully, then changed the subject to baseball statistics. But I could tell he was still processing the restaurant experience, trying to make sense of family dynamics that didn't add up to an 8-year-old's understanding of fairness. After breakfast, I decided we needed some father-son time away from family complications. We drove to Miller Park, where Tommy could practice batting while I worked through my frustration with some physical activity. The park was busy with weekend warriors, families flying kites, teenagers playing pickup basketball, and other fathers teaching their kids various sports skills. Tommy was connecting with about half my pitches when my phone rang. Amanda's name appeared on the screen. Keep practicing, buddy. I'll be right over here. I told Tommy, walking far enough away that he couldn't hear our conversation. Brian, I need to talk to you about last night. Amanda's voice carried a tension I hadn't heard since our teenage years. What about it? That wasn't right. The way Dad and Patricia treated Tommy, I mean. Marcus and I talked about it after we got home and we both felt terrible. I appreciated her acknowledgement, but it felt a little late. Tommy's resilient. He'll be fine. That's not the point. Amanda's voice grew stronger. He shouldn't have to be resilient about this kind of thing. We're supposed to be his family. Well, apparently some of us are more family than others. Brian, there's something else, something I think you should know. The serious tone made me pay closer attention. What is it? After you left, Patricia and Dad were making calls about that lake house. I overheard Patricia talking to someone else afterward, and it wasn't about vacation rentals. What do you mean? Amanda hesitated. She was talking to someone about Dad's business, about selling the construction company. My world tilted sideways. Dad owned Hartley Construction, the company he'd built from nothing over 30 years ago. It wasn't a massive operation, but it was successful, well respected, and something I'd always assumed would stay in the family somehow. That can't be right, I said. Dad would have mentioned something that important. I don't think he's told anyone except Patricia. From what I could hear, she's been pushing him to sell quickly. Something about wanting to travel while they're still healthy. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Did he mention anything about offering it to employees first, or maybe selling to someone who'd keep the current staff? Brian, I don't think you understand. Patricia was talking about maximizing profit. She mentioned something about a developer who wants to buy the company specifically for the client list, and then dissolve the actual construction side. The implications hit me like a freight train. Dad's company employed 12 people, including several guys who'd been with him for over a decade. If a developer bought it just for the client contacts, those jobs would disappear. More personally, I'd always hoped that my construction management experience might eventually lead to some involvement in the family business. How sure are you about this? I asked. Pretty sure. She was talking numbers, timeline, all the details. Brian, she sounded excited about it. I watched Tommy take a particularly good swing at an imaginary pitch, his form improving with each attempt. The contrast between his simple joy in the moment and the complex family betrayals unfolding in the background made my chest tight. There's something else, Amanda continued. Patricia made a comment about how selling now would be better because Dad wouldn't have to worry about family complications in the business. Family complications meaning me. I think so, yes. I needed to sit down. There was a bench nearby, and I sank onto it while processing this information. Not only was I being excluded from family social events, but Patricia was apparently working to eliminate any possibility of my professional future being connected to family as well. Amanda, why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong, and because I think Patricia has been manipulating Dad more than any of us realized. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another call. Dad's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, I told Amanda. Can we talk more later? Of course. Brian, I'm sorry about last night, and I'm sorry about this business thing. I should have said something sooner. I switched calls. Hey, Dad. Brian, glad I caught you. Got a minute to talk? Sure, what's up? Well, Patricia and I were discussing some things after dinner last night, and I realized maybe I came across a little harsh about the check situation. A little harsh? That was one way to describe publicly humiliating my son. It's fine, Dad, we managed. Good. Listen, I was thinking maybe you and Tommy could come by the house this afternoon. Patricia's making her famous pot roast, and I thought we could spend some quality time together. I glanced at Tommy, who was now trying to hit pop flies to himself. We've got Little League practice at 3. Right. Baseball's important. Maybe afterward then. There was something in Dad's voice I couldn't quite identify. Guilt, maybe, or genuine regret. But after Amanda's revelations, I wasn't sure I could sit through another meal pretending everything was normal. Let me see how practice goes, I said non-committally. Tommy might be tired afterward. Of course. Well, rain check then. After we hung up, I called Amanda back. She answered on the first ring. How much detail did you hear about the business sale? I asked, without preamble. Enough to know they're moving fast. Patricia mentioned something about having papers drawn up next week. Next week? My voice came out louder than intended, causing Tommy to look over with concern. I waved to show everything was okay. Brian, I think you should talk to Dad directly about this. If he's really planning to sell, shouldn't family have first chance to buy it? She was right, but the idea of confronting Dad about major life decisions he'd deliberately hidden from me felt overwhelming. Still, if Patricia was pushing for a quick sale to maximize her personal benefit, someone needed to speak up for the employees who'd be affected. You said Patricia was excited about the sale. Did you get any sense of why? Amanda was quiet for a long moment. This might sound crazy, but I think she needs money for something. She's been talking a lot lately about expensive things they should buy, places they should travel. It's like she has specific plans for that money. What kind of plans? New car, European cruise, maybe even a winter home in Arizona. Nothing illegal, but definitely expensive lifestyle upgrades that require a big cash infusion. I thought about Patricia's behavior at dinner, her need to order the most expensive items and make a show of sophistication. Maybe her performance wasn't just about putting me in my place. Maybe it was about establishing herself as someone who deserved expensive things. Amanda, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Do you think Patricia has been working to push Tommy and me out of the family? I think Patricia sees Dad's money and status as resources that should benefit her, and anyone who might compete for those resources is a threat. Including Dad's son and grandson. Especially Dad's son and grandson. The conversation left me with more questions than answers. But one thing was crystal clear. I needed to have a direct conversation with Dad about the business sale before Patricia's timeline made it impossible. If there was even a chance of keeping the company in the family or protecting the current employees, I owed it to everyone involved to try. Tommy jogged over, having finished his batting practice. Dad, can we work on catching fly balls now? Absolutely, buddy. Let's see that glove work. As we spent the next hour playing catch, I found myself studying my son's face, looking for signs of lasting damage from the restaurant incident. But Tommy seemed remarkably resilient, focused on baseball and spending time together, rather than dwelling on family slights. Maybe that was the answer. Instead of trying to fix broken family dynamics, maybe I needed to focus on building something better for Tommy and myself. If Patricia wanted to eliminate family complications from Dad's life, perhaps it was time to take her up on that offer. But first, I needed to know exactly what was being sold and to whom. Because if Dad was really planning to dissolve a company that employed good people just to fund Patricia's retirement dreams, someone needed to fight for a better solution. The question was whether I had the strength to take on a battle I might not be able to win. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from Dad's office. His secretary, Janet, who'd known me since I was Tommy's age, sounded nervous on the phone. Brian, your father asked me to schedule a meeting with you this week. Something about business matters. Are you available Wednesday afternoon? The timing felt suspicious, coming so soon after Amanda's revelations about the company sale. What kind of business matters, Janet? He didn't specify honey, just said it was important to discuss some upcoming changes. I agreed to meet Wednesday at 2 o'clock, then spent the next 2 days researching business valuations and sale processes. If Dad was planning to sell Hartley Construction, I wanted to understand the financial implications and potential alternatives. Tuesday evening, I called my former colleague David Chen, who worked in commercial real estate and had experience with small business acquisitions. Over dinner at a quiet sports bar, he walked me through the typical process of selling a construction company. The key question is whether the buyer wants the ongoing business or just the assets, David explained. If it's a developer looking for client lists, they'll usually pay a premium but dissolve the operations immediately. What would a company like my dad's be worth? David asked detailed questions about revenue assets and client contracts. Based on my estimates, he figured the business could be worth anywhere from $800,000 to $1.2 million, depending on the buyer's intentions. If your dad really is planning to sell, you should know that family members often get first right of refusal, David said. It's not legally required, but it's common practice in small family businesses. What if someone's been deliberately kept out of discussions? Then you'd need to approach him directly and quickly. Once papers are signed with an outside buyer, family options usually disappear. Wednesday afternoon arrived with unseasonable heat and humidity. I dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing professional attire that would signal I was taking this conversation seriously. Dad's office was located in a converted warehouse that served as both headquarters and equipment storage for Hartley Construction. Janet greeted me with the kind of maternal warmth I remembered from childhood visits. "He's waiting in the conference room, honey. Can I get you some coffee?" "Thanks, Janet. Coffee would be great." Dad was sitting at the head of the oval conference table, papers spread in front of him like he was preparing for a board meeting. He looked older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes, and gray creeping into his beard. "Brian, good to see you, son. Thanks for making time." I took the chair across from him, accepting coffee from Janet, before she discreetly closed the door behind her. "What's this about, Dad?" He shuffled his papers nervously. "Well, Patricia and I have been doing some thinking about our future. Planning for retirement, you know." "Okay. The thing is, we've been looking at our assets, considering how to maximize our financial security as we get older." I waited for him to continue, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. "I've been running this company for over 30 years, Brian. It's been good to me, but I'm 65 now. Patricia thinks maybe it's time to consider our options." "What kind of options?" Dad met my eyes briefly, then looked back at his papers. "There's a development company interested in purchasing Hartley Construction. Good offer, clean transaction. What happens to the employees? That would be up to the new owners." I felt my temper rising. "Dad, you've got guys who've worked here for over a decade. Jimmy Martinez has been with you since I was in high school. I understand your concern, son, but I have to think about Patricia's and my future." "What about family? Shouldn't family have a chance to keep the business going?" Dad looked genuinely surprised. "Family, Brian, you work for Midwest Construction Supply. You've got your own career path. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be interested in family business opportunities." "But you've never expressed interest before." I stared at him in disbelief. "Dad, I've been working in construction management for 8 years. I have a degree in business administration and hands-on experience with exactly the kind of projects this company handles. How is that not expressing interest?" "Well, yes, but you've never specifically asked about joining the company." "Because I thought you'd approach me if you wanted me involved. I didn't want to seem presumptuous." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia felt it would be better to keep family and business separate. Avoid potential complications." "Complications meaning what?" "Well, if things didn't work out, it could strain family relationships." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Dad, what's the timeline on this sale?" "We're hoping to have papers signed by the end of next week." "Next week?" I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice. "That seems incredibly fast." "The buyers are eager, and Patricia thinks we should move quickly while the offer is good." Patricia thinks. Everything came back to what Patricia thought wanted or recommended. "What's the offer, if you don't mind me asking?" Dad hesitated. $900,000. I'd done enough research to know that was probably below market value for a profitable construction company with an established client base. "Have you gotten a second opinion on the valuation?" "Patricia researched comparable sales. This is a fair offer." "Dad, I'd like to make a counteroffer." He looked genuinely surprised. "What kind of counteroffer?" "I'd like to buy the company myself." The silence stretched between us while Dad processed this unexpected development. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Brian, do you have that kind of capital?" "I could arrange financing. The company's existing contracts and reputation would secure a business loan for most of the purchase price." "But that's a huge risk for you. What if the business doesn't continue to be profitable?" "It's been profitable for 30 years. I know the industry, I know the clients, and I know the employees. It's actually a smart business investment." Dad stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the equipment yard, where trucks and machinery sat ready for the next day's projects. "Patricia's not going to like this," he said finally. Why would Patricia care who buys the company as long as you get fair market value? She's been looking forward to having liquid assets for our retirement plans. Dad, if I buy the company, you'd still get the same money. The only difference would be keeping it in the family and protecting the jobs of people who've been loyal to you for decades. He turned back to face me. I'd need to discuss this with Patricia. Of course. But I'd like you to consider putting a hold on the other sale until we can explore this option properly. The buyers want a quick decision. Any legitimate buyer would understand you taking a few days to consider a family offer. If they're pressuring you to sign immediately, that's actually a red flag. Dad returned to his chair, looking troubled. Brian, can I ask you something honestly? Sure. Are you doing this because you genuinely want the business, or because you're upset about other family issues? The question caught me off guard with its directness. Both, maybe. But Dad, I've been thinking about my long-term career goals, especially since moving back to Cedar Falls. Running a construction company would be a natural progression from what I've been doing. And Tommy? How would business ownership affect your time with him? Actually, it would give me more flexibility. I could set my own schedule, be available for his school events and games. Dad nodded slowly. You've thought about this seriously. I have. And I think it would be good for Tommy to see his father building something meaningful rather than just working for someone else. That's important, Dad agreed. I always regretted that you and Amanda didn't get to see me build this company from the ground up. We talked for another hour about operational details, client relationships, and financial projections. Despite his initial surprise, Dad seemed genuinely interested in my ideas for growing the business while maintaining its reputation for quality work. As our meeting wound down, he gathered his papers with the careful movements of someone making a difficult decision. Brian, I'll need to discuss this with Patricia tonight. Can you put together a formal proposal by Friday? Absolutely. I'll include financing options, transition timeline, and employee retention plans. Good. And son, I appreciate you approaching this professionally. I know last weekend's dinner didn't go as smoothly as it could have. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and I accepted it gracefully. Thanks for considering this, Dad. I think it could work out well for everyone. Driving home, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. Buying the company would solve multiple problems, keeping jobs secure, building equity for Tommy's future, and establishing my independence from Patricia's manipulations. But I also knew Patricia wouldn't give up her retirement plans without a fight. The next few days would determine whether family loyalty could compete with financial ambition. Thursday evening, my phone rang at exactly 6:30. Dad's voice sounded strained when I answered. Brian, we need to talk. Can you come to the house tonight? Of course. Is everything okay? Just come over. Patricia and I need to discuss your proposal. I arranged for our neighbor Mrs. Peterson to stay with Tommy and drove to Dad's house with a folder containing my detailed business plan. I'd spent the entire previous evening working through financial projections, employee contracts, and growth strategies. If Patricia was going to challenge my proposal, I wanted to be prepared. The house felt different when I walked in. Patricia greeted me with forced politeness, but her usual theatrical warmth was nowhere to be found. Dad looked like he hadn't slept well. Let's sit in the living room, Dad said, gesturing toward the formal furniture that was rarely used for casual family visits. Patricia perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid with tension. Dad settled into his recliner, avoiding eye contact. I've reviewed your proposal with Patricia, Dad began. It's thorough and well thought out. Thank you. I tried to address all the practical considerations. The problem is timing, Patricia interjected. The other buyers want a decision tomorrow. They've been very accommodating with their timeline, and it wouldn't be fair to make them wait indefinitely. I understand their eagerness, I said carefully, but surely a day or two wouldn't matter for such a major decision. Actually, it might. Patricia's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. They've indicated that delays could affect their offer amount. I looked between them, sensing undercurrents I wasn't fully understanding. Dad, what's your feeling about the timeline? Well, son, Patricia makes a good point about not keeping buyers waiting. But we're talking about family here, I said. Shouldn't family considerations outweigh convenience for outside buyers? Patricia's mask slipped completely. Brian, I think you're romanticizing this situation. Harold has worked hard his entire life to build financial security. He deserves to maximize the return on his investment. I'm not suggesting he take less money. My offer is competitive with theirs. But your offer involves risk, she continued. Financing contingencies, business loan approvals, all sorts of complications that could fall through. Those are standard conditions for any business purchase. Not with our buyers. They're offering cash, immediate closing, no contingencies. Something about her insistence bothered me. Who exactly are these buyers? Dad and Patricia exchanged glances. Meridian Development Group, Dad said finally. They specialize in acquiring construction companies. I'd never heard of them, which was unusual in Minnesota's relatively small construction industry. Are they local? Regional, Patricia answered quickly. They have offices throughout the Midwest. I'd like to research them before making any decisions, I said. It's important to understand who we'd be selling to. Patricia's irritation flared. Brian, you're not part of this decision. Harold is the owner, and he gets to choose his buyers. The bluntness of her statement hung in the air like a slap. Dad shifted uncomfortably, but didn't contradict her. Patricia's right that it's my decision, Dad said slowly. But I do want to consider family interests. Then let's talk about what those interests actually are, I said, pulling out my folder. I've prepared a detailed transition plan that would protect employee jobs, maintain client relationships, and provide Dad with steady income through seller financing. I walked them through my proposal, purchasing the company for $950,000 with $300,000 down, and the remainder paid over 5 years at competitive interest rates. The plan included keeping all current employees, maintaining the company's reputation and client base, and providing Dad with ongoing consultation income if he wanted to stay involved. This gives you $50,000 more than the other offer, plus long-term income, and the satisfaction of knowing the company continues to serve the community. I concluded. Patricia was shaking her head before I finished. The payment plan creates too much uncertainty. What if the business fails? What if Brian can't make the payments? Those are legitimate concerns, I acknowledged. That's why I've included business insurance and personal guarantees to protect Dad's interests. It's still more complicated than a simple cash sale, Patricia insisted. But it's also more beneficial for everyone involved except the outside buyers. Dad had been quiet during this exchange, studying my written proposal with intense concentration. Brian, this is impressive work, he said finally. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this. Thank you. I really believe this could work well for everyone. Dad set the papers aside and looked directly at me for the first time that evening. Son, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you doing this partly because of how Tommy was treated at dinner last weekend? The question surprised me with its directness. Partly, yes, but mainly because I think it's the right business decision and the right thing for our family. Harold Hein. Patricia interrupted. We shouldn't make major financial decisions based on hurt feelings from a restaurant miscommunication. It wasn't a miscommunication, I said firmly. It was deliberate exclusion of my son, and it's part of a pattern that's been developing since you married into this family. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. I resent the implication that I've done anything wrong. I've been nothing but welcoming to you and Tommy. Welcoming you've excluded us from family trips, made disparaging comments about our financial situation, and actively worked to position Amanda's family as more worthy of Dad's attention and resources. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then explain why Tommy couldn't have the same dinner as his cousins. Explain why they're invited to the lake house but we're not. Explain why you've been pushing Dad to sell the company quickly, without discussing it with family first. Patricia stood up abruptly. I don't have to explain anything to you. Harold and I make decisions together based on what's best for our future. Your future, not the family's future. Dad finally spoke up. That's enough, both of you. This isn't helping anyone. Dad, I need you to understand something, I said, staying seated, but making direct eye contact. Patricia has been working systematically to remove Tommy and me from your life. The restaurant dinner wasn't an isolated incident. It was a public demonstration that we don't matter as much as Amanda's family. Brian, that's not fair, Dad protested. Isn't it? When was the last time you called to ask about Tommy's school or baseball without being prompted? When was the last time you invited us to family activities without Patricia finding reasons why we shouldn't attend? Dad looked genuinely troubled. I hadn't thought about it that way. Because Patricia's been subtle about it. She hasn't said exclude Brian and Tommy. She's just consistently found ways to make that happen while making it seem natural or necessary. Patricia's face was red with fury. Harold, are you going to let him talk about me this way? Actually, Dad said slowly, I think I need to hear this. Brian, what specifically are you talking about? Last month when you invited Amanda's family to that new restaurant downtown, why wasn't I included? Dad looked confused. Patricia said you were busy with work. I was never asked. Patricia made the assumption and you accepted it. Is that true, Patricia? Patricia's silence spoke volumes. And the family barbecue 2 weeks ago at Amanda's house. I continued. Tommy asked me why he wasn't invited when Sophie mentioned it at baseball practice. Dad turned to Patricia. I thought you said Brian preferred to keep family gatherings small. I was trying to avoid overwhelming situations, Patricia said defensively. By deciding for me without asking. Dad was beginning to look sick as the pattern became clear. Patricia, have you been making decisions about family invitations without discussing them with me? I was trying to manage social dynamics for everyone's comfort. Whose comfort? I asked. Because Tommy's comfort certainly wasn't considered. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Dad's grandfather clock. Patricia sat back down, her previous confidence evaporating. Harold, she said quietly, I may have made some mistakes in judgment. Some mistakes. I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Patricia, you've been systematically working to erase my son and me from family life while positioning yourself and Amanda's family as Dad's primary concern. Dad stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders sagging. Jesus, Brian. If what you're saying is true, I've let you and Tommy down badly. It's not too late to change things, I said gently. But it starts with recognizing what's been happening and making different choices going forward. Patricia was crying now, though. Whether from genuine remorse or frustration at being exposed, I couldn't tell. I never meant to hurt Tommy, she said through tears. I just wanted Harold to see how well Amanda's family was doing. I thought it would make him proud. At the expense of his other grandchild. I didn't think about it that way. Dad returned to his chair, looking older than his 65 years. Patricia, we need to talk about this privately. But first, Brian, I want you to know that I'm sorry. You and Tommy deserve better from me. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. He picked up my business proposal again. And regarding the company, I want to give your offer serious consideration. Can you wait until Monday for a final decision? Of course. Patricia, do you have any objections to postponing the other sale until we can properly evaluate Brian's proposal? Patricia wiped her eyes and nodded reluctantly. If that's what you want, Harold. As I prepared to leave, Dad walked me to the door. Son, I want to make things right with Tommy. Would you be willing to bring him to dinner this weekend, just the 3 of us? I think he'd like that very much. Driving home, I felt emotionally drained, but cautiously hopeful. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. And for the first time in months, I felt like Dad was seeing our family situation clearly. Whether Patricia's promises of change would last remained to be seen, but at least the manipulation was now out in the open, where it could be addressed directly. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers that made me the owner of Hartley Construction. Dad had accepted my proposal enthusiastically once he understood the full scope of my business plan and the employee protection it provided. Patricia, to her credit, had apologized sincerely and was attending counseling to address what she called her competitive instincts around family relationships. The business transition went smoother than I'd expected. Dad stayed on as a consultant for the first month, helping me understand client relationships and operational details I hadn't fully grasped from the outside. The employees were relieved to keep their jobs and seemed genuinely excited about working for someone who understood both the technical and business sides of construction. Jimmy Martinez, the foreman who'd been with Dad for 15 years, pulled me aside on my first official day as owner. "Brian, I want you to know how grateful we all are. When we heard the company might be sold to developers, we figured we'd all be looking for new jobs by Christmas." "You're the backbone of this operation, Jimmy. I'd be crazy to change what's working. Your dad raised you right. You've got his integrity, but your own vision for where the company should go." The comment made me think about the difference between inheriting something and earning it. Even though this was the family business, I was purchasing it with my own financing and taking responsibility for its success or failure. That ownership felt different from simply being handed something because of my last name. Tommy had been fascinated by the idea of his dad owning a construction company. He'd asked detailed questions about building houses, managing workers, and whether he could visit job sites during summer vacation. "Will you still have time for baseball games?" he asked with 8-year-old practicality. "Even more time," I assured him. "One of the benefits of being the boss is setting your own schedule around the things that matter most." True to his word, Dad had arranged several grandfather-grandson outings with Tommy. They'd gone fishing, attended a Twins game, and built an elaborate birdhouse for our backyard. The relationship was rebuilding slowly but genuinely. Amanda had become a real ally during the business transition, offering to help with bookkeeping and marketing ideas. She'd also made a point of including Tommy in family activities, naturally, without the artificial barriers Patricia had previously created. "I should have spoken up sooner," she told me during one of our coffee conversations. "I knew what Patricia was doing wasn't right, but I was afraid of causing family conflict." "We all make mistakes when family dynamics get complicated," I replied. "The important thing is that we're fixing it now." The most surprising development had been my collaboration with Dr. Sarah Chen from the Family Mediation Nonprofit. Her organization needed reliable contractors for affordable housing projects, and Hartley Construction was perfectly positioned to take on meaningful community work alongside our traditional commercial clients. "Your company's reputation for quality and fair pricing makes you ideal for our housing initiatives," Dr. Chen explained during our first project meeting. "We need partners who understand that building homes for working families requires both excellent craftsmanship and cost consciousness." The non-profit work provided steady income while giving me deep satisfaction. Every house we built represented a family achieving homeownership, children having stable neighborhoods, and communities growing stronger. It wasn't the most profitable part of our business, but it was the most meaningful. Tommy often accompanied me to ribbon-cutting ceremonies when families received their new homes. Watching 8-year-olds explore their new bedrooms and backyards gave him perspective on how construction work affected real people's lives. "Dad, did you always want to build houses for families?" he asked after one particularly emotional ceremony where a single mother cried while receiving her house keys. "I didn't know it until recently, buddy. Sometimes you have to try something to realize it's what you were meant to do." The business grew steadily through spring and summer. Word spread about our community involvement, leading to referrals for larger commercial projects from clients who appreciated our values-driven approach. By fall, we'd hired 2 additional employees and were booking projects months in advance. The financial success was gratifying, but the personal satisfaction was even more important. I was building something meaningful that would provide for Tommy's future while contributing positively to our community. The work challenged me professionally, while allowing flexibility for family priorities. One evening in October, as Tommy and I were reviewing his homework at the kitchen table, he looked up from his math problems with a serious expression. "Dad, can I ask you something about that dinner at the fancy restaurant?" I set aside the construction estimates I'd been reviewing. "Of course, buddy. What about it? You could have gotten mad and yelled at Grandpa and Patricia, right?" "I suppose I could have. But you didn't. You stayed calm and figured out a better way to fix things." "Well, what made you think about that?" Tommy shrugged with the casual wisdom of childhood. "My friend Jake at school says his parents scream at each other when they're upset, and it doesn't make anything better. But you fixed our family without screaming." I felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. Sometimes staying calm helps you think more clearly about solutions. Is that why we're happier now? I think we're happier because we dealt with problems honestly instead of pretending they didn't exist. And because Grandpa realized he was being unfair. Yes, that too. People can change when they understand how their actions affect others. Tommy returned to his math problems satisfied with my explanation. But his observations stuck with me long after bedtime. The restaurant incident had been a turning point, but not because I'd confronted anyone aggressively or demanded immediate justice. Instead, staying calm had allowed me to see the bigger picture: Patricia's manipulation, Dad's blind spots, and my own need to establish independence rather than just react to unfair treatment. The business purchase had given me more than financial security. It provided proof that I could succeed based on my own merits rather than family connections or inherited advantages. Tommy was learning that success comes from preparation, integrity, and perseverance, rather than demanding special treatment or harboring resentment. 6 months after that humiliating dinner, Dad hosted a celebration at our newly renovated family home to mark Hartley Construction's first year under my ownership. The guest list included employees, clients, and family members who'd all contributed to our success in different ways. Patricia had prepared an elaborate meal, but this time she insisted on making it a potluck, where everyone contributed something homemade. Tommy brought a batch of cookies he'd baked himself, proudly placing them on the dessert table next to Patricia's fancy cake. "Uncle Brian, your house is so cool!" Sophie exclaimed, as she and Grace explored the renovated kitchen with Tommy. "Did you build it yourself?" "Dad and his workers fixed it up," Tommy explained with obvious pride. "They made the kitchen bigger and added the deck out back." Amanda approached as I watched the kids play in the backyard. "You've built something really special here, Brian. Not just the business, but the life you're creating for Tommy." "Thanks, it's been quite a journey." "Any regrets about how things worked out?" I considered her question while watching Tommy teach his cousins how to throw a curveball with a tennis ball. "No regrets," I said finally. If that restaurant dinner hadn't happened, I might never have realized what changes needed to be made. Sometimes difficult moments show you exactly what you need to fight for. Dad joined our conversation carrying 2 beers and looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Brian, I've been thinking about what you said that night we discussed the business sale." "What about it?" "You asked whether family should have first consideration in major decisions. You were right about that, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. We all learned something from that experience." "Maybe so. But I want you to know that watching you build this company has been one of the proudest experiences of my life. You took something good and made it better while staying true to your values." "That means everything to me, Dad." As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, Tommy helped clear dishes while chattering about his plans for the summer. He wanted to learn more about construction, maybe help with some of the non-profit housing projects if I thought he was old enough. "Dad, do you think we could build houses for kids who don't have nice homes like ours?" "I think that's an excellent goal, buddy. We'll start planning that next week." Driving home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that painful Saturday evening at Romano's Steakhouse. The humiliation I'd felt watching Tommy be treated as lesser than his cousins had motivated me to examine not just that incident, but the entire pattern of family relationships I'd been accepting, without question. Fighting back didn't require aggression or burning bridges. It required clarity about my values, courage to pursue better alternatives, and patience to build something meaningful rather than just tearing down what was broken. Tommy learned that self-respect and family love weren't mutually exclusive. He watched me stand up for our dignity while maintaining relationships with people who mattered to us. Most importantly, he saw that you don't have to accept unfair treatment to be a good person, but you also don't have to become bitter or vengeful to protect yourself. The business provided financial security and professional satisfaction, but the deeper lesson was about building the life you want, rather than just reacting to the life others create for you. When someone tries to make you feel small, the best response isn't to make them feel smaller in return. It's to grow yourself and your circumstances until their opinion becomes irrelevant. Patricia still occasionally makes thoughtless comments, but they don't carry the same sting because my sense of worth no longer depends on her approval. Dad continues to learn about being a more intentional grandfather, and his relationship with Tommy grows stronger each month. Amanda and I have become genuine friends rather than just siblings navigating family politics. She started volunteer work with Dr. Chen's organization, using her marketing skills to help promote affordable housing initiatives. The construction company thrives because it's built on principles of fairness, quality work, and community service. Our employees know they're valued, our clients trust our integrity, and our projects contribute positively to neighborhoods throughout central Minnesota. But the most important success is Tommy's confidence in himself and his place in the world. He knows his father will fight for what's right without teaching him to be bitter or resentful. He's learning that you can set boundaries with people you love, that money isn't the measure of worth, and that building something meaningful takes time, but provides lasting satisfaction. That night at Romano's, when Dad announced we were ordering cheap food for the kids while others enjoyed elaborate meals, I felt humiliated and angry. But I also felt something else determined to create better circumstances, rather than just endure unfair ones. The determination led to everything that followed the business purchase, the community work, the rebuilt family relationships, and most importantly, the example I set for Tommy about responding to adversity with grace and strength. Sometimes the worst moments teach us exactly what we need to fight for and give us the motivation to make necessary changes. That painful dinner was actually a gift, though it took months to recognize it as such. Now when Tommy faces unfair situations, he has a model for staying calm while working toward solutions. He knows that dignity comes from your own actions, not from how others treat you, and that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is building a life so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. I learned that night at Romano's that you don't have to accept disrespect to maintain family relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stand firm on your values and trust that real family will rise to meet you there. And sometimes when they don't, you build something better that shows them what they're missing while creating the life you actually want to live. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members treated you unfairly, and you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear about how you handled similar challenges, and whether standing your ground led to positive changes in your relationships. Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building the life you deserve. And if you know someone who's dealing with difficult family dynamics, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing that others have faced similar situations and found positive solutions can make all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for being part of this community. where we support each other through life's complicated moments. Remember, you have more power than you think to change unfair situations, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that doesn't honor your worth. Until next time, keep building the life you want with integrity, courage, and hope.